Greetings, hello, guten tag. So today we are moving into the last chapter in the first section of the book. It's divided into a couple of sections. So that is chapter 5, and today basically we're going to be working through, or at least attempting to work through, because let me tell you, I got more questions than I do answers from this chapter, the concept of bluffing in human behavior and relative to game theory, and sort of differentiating what it is to bluff from what it is to lie, and what kind of strategy that is, and what kind of applications it might have. Yes. So, alright, so, to sort of break into it, we've got to first sort of deconstruct what it is. I mean, it might be obvious, but, you know, it's important to flesh out the key differences here between a lie and a bluff. So a lie, obviously, is something that is, it's a direct expression of falsity, right? It's, I have told you something which is evidently false to me, and I'm doing that for the sole purpose either to deceive you, or perhaps to, you know, make you think, well, I guess yes, well, to make you think something that I'd like you to think is the case. So I think maybe those are the same things, but kind of different. So, like, I may think it's based off my reason for deceiving you. So maybe I want to deceive you for something to do with you, or maybe I want to deceive you more to believe something about me. But nonetheless, whatever the case for the reason for your deception, you are explicitly, directly deceiving someone, and you have the intent to deceive them, and the purpose of that deceit is to lead them to believe something is the case, which is not in fact the case. Simple. Okay, so lie, so that means basically we can say that it's direct is the first thing, right? So direct in the sense that it's explicit, expressed in words. It's ooh. The whiteboard like moved down a little bit. Okay, so direct. Okay, so then a bluff, however, this is, you know, according to Mara's distinction, it's that a bluff is different in the sense that it's not direct. It's not, you know, explicit. It's conveying a meaning that is deceptive to another person without actually lying to them. So it's something, a bluff is something that's meant to be indirect, at least in, you know, Laszlo's interpretation of a bluff. So that is to say, you're trying to lead someone to believe that something is the case through your inexpression. So that would be, you know, for example, like displaying certain facial expressions or lack of facial expressions, perhaps during a conversation with someone, that would lead them to believe that you're either agreeing with them, that you know what they're talking about, or perhaps that you don't know what they're talking about. You know, so it's sort of, it's a deception. It's kind of a lie, but it's you lying without you actually saying something that's explicitly false. So to put that another way, it'd be direct and indirect, and explicit and implicit. So one example that Maro gave in this chapter of, you know, conceptualizing the difference, I mean, it might be obvious, but for the sake of talking, the example he gave is to consider a student in the classroom in two situations. So in the first situation, the student hasn't, well, in both situations, but right now, the student has not done their homework, and the teacher is, you know, asking everyone, like, does everyone have their homework done? You know, perhaps it's like a small seminar, there's only 6 people, so she asks each person directly, and the first person she asks has not done it, and she asks him, and he says, yes, I've in fact done it. So it's pretty obvious, right? That's a direct lie. So that's one thing. But then the bluff is, let's say that the teacher says in front of the class, you know, who's done the readings, who's finished their work, and she looks around at everyone, people are going like this, and then, you know, the student who hasn't done it is like making sort of like a vague, you know, like it's very like a very subtle inference through his subtle nod that would imply to the teacher that, yes, I agree with what you're saying, I've done what you've said, right? So that's a bluff. That's, it's sort of impartial, so she can take it to be the case that, yes, he has done it, but he could also be protected in that instance because he never explicitly said that he did it. He just, happened to make some gestures. So, with that being said, Merrill also points out to these things having, to a lie and a bluff, having different and very important consequences that we need to flesh out too. So, the consequences, so down here, oh, that lack of, oh, that's irritating. The asymmetry of thickness. I don't like it. Okay, so here we wait. Mother Teresa. Sorry. Consequences. Okay. Sorry for that little hoopla there. Okay, so the consequences, how they differ for a lie and from a bluff, is that if you directly tell a lie, so let's go back to the teacher example. So let's assume that student lies to the teacher. Like, he says, yes, Miss whatever, I've done it. And then later in the class, she calls on him and asks him, answer this question about whatever, like, what's the answer? And of course, the student won't be able to answer the question because they haven't done the readings. So in that case, it becomes evident to the teacher that he has explicitly lied to her, right? So the person, how do we put this? The person that's been lied to becomes aware of the person who lied as a liar, right? So you sort of, in the case of lying, you get branded, right? So I think that's a good way to put it. And a good conceptualization of being branded as a liar and the consequences is that age-old, I don't know if it's a proverb or what you'd call it, but the one who cried wolf. So that is to say, if you create to another person the perception in them that you're a liar and that you lie about things, well then you will create in them this sort of the perception of you that you can't be trusted, essentially, that you may tell me something, but because you've lied to me in the past, I therefore have reason to doubt everything you'll say in the future, right? So although, I'm pretty sure that's a fallacy of reasoning, assuming that the future will be like the past, but nonetheless, people still, doesn't stop people from thinking in logically fallacious ways. So the point is that person now has the perception deemed on them, branded upon them, that they're a liar. They're the one who cried wolf, the one who cried I've done my homework when I haven't. Okay, so that's that. But then moving into the person who bluffs, right? So now let's go back to that situation. So the person who bluffs. So at the beginning back into the teacher classroom. So he didn't say anything. He just made a slightly vacant, but slightly present countenance that he is in some sense agreeing. So then he gets called upon by the teacher, and he, can't answer the question because, of course, he was bluffing. So the teacher, in turn, doesn't necessarily have the full perception that she was directly lied to, right? Because she can't completely draw that conclusion, because he didn't in fact say whether he had done it or not. For all she knows, maybe he was thinking about something lovely at the time at which he, made this sort of agreeable gesture. Or maybe, he was looking at someone else. Who knows what he was thinking? So she's not fully justified and doesn't in turn brand him as a liar, but that the way that Merrill puts it is that it sets up a different kind of dynamic between them, where she will be more aware of him as bluffing and be more likely to challenge him in the future rather than just disregard him as a liar. So in a sense it's being branded, I think, being realized as bluffing, but in a sort of both advantageous and disadvantageous way, I think, right? Because she'll create a perception of him as bluffer, and let's say Marrow makes this point in the book, well then she will perceive him with a sort of doubtfulness, or she'll have a doubtfulness aimed at him, and she will challenge him again, or ask him to answer something again in the classroom under perhaps the idea or the presupposition that he may be bluffing again. And that sort of puts him, Marrow argues, in a potentially advantageous state, because then, although he's bluffed this once, he has the capacity, through realizing the situation, making sure that in the next situations that he is prepared. So, no, sorry, what I mean is that in the next class, let's say that he is fully prepared, and she's sort of, with like a mildly smug countenance, is like, calls on him to answer some question with the idea that, he probably hasn't done his homework, and then he just, completely just destroys her with the best possible answer that's ever been said, or, at least like a very good answer. So it kind of puts him in a position where he's able to kind of manipulate her perception, or or create, I don't know, it kind of seems like he has more control there, right? Because he's able, by bluffing, he creates an idea in her, and she'll act on that idea later, but he can in turn manipulate that idea in the future by acting differently, right? By taking her by surprise. So how would we, relative to being branded as the liar, what would we say that the bluff person, what's the perception of the teacher of the bluffer, or how would she categorize him? I think I'd just say bluffer, because I'm pretty sure that's what she thinks, because she knows that he bluffed at the beginning, or that's what she thinks anyway. So I think I think that works, because you could be like, okay, you could be branded as a bluffer, right? But that's not the same thing as being branded as a liar. I think those are very, very different conceptions of being branded as something, right? Because as we just walked through, being branded as a bluffer can put you in an advantageous situation if you're aware of that person's perception and how to manipulate it over time. But being branded as a liar, you lose the ability to manipulate that person in your direction, right? Because you've implanted in them a continual doubt about anything that you will in the future say, right? So, Alright, so sorry about the board there, yeah, I fixed that. Okay, so really, bluffing is we should conceptualize this as, lying is a non-advanced, short-term strategy to suit one's likely self-interest in some way, or someone's self-interest in deceiving someone else for some other purpose. So, however, Marrow says, and I think we find this is true through the example we just talked about, is that bluffing is a much more advanced long-term strategy, because although it creates in the other person an idea which is, it could be doubtful or positive about you in some way, if your bluff becomes revealed, you're not branded as something other than bluffer. And this makes you able to manipulate that person in the future, or change their perception of you in the future in the better way, or in a better way which you would prefer. So that, in the example that we talked about with the teacher and the student, is that this teacher might conceptualize the student as a bluffer and therefore challenge him later, but then him being conscious, realizing what she thinks based on what he's done, he can then return to the next class prepared for her to have the assumption that he's a bluffer and that she will challenge him, and then he can therefore be prepared to meet the challenge and to, alter the perception. So in this way, I think we could apply this also to, for example, like the best application, like I really struggled with finding like really substantive, meaningful applications of bluffing, because outside of poker, which is, you know, I mean, you can derive some valuable interpretations of bluffing from poker, of course, but I struggle to find any other really meaningful ones. But one I found, for example, is in business, right? So when I started my business franchise last summer, I had 2 years of experience painting. However, I had never had the experience of being a business owner, right? And so one of the things that's really important to customers, especially when you're gonna be, you know, having a team of people painting their home, is that, you know, you have some experience with what you're doing, and they expect you to have some experience with business. So if I were to outrightly, like, let's say a customer were to ask me about my experience, or how much experience do you have? If I were to outrightly lie and say, like, I have tons of experience with business, like, I know everything in and out, and, you know, strongly suggest that I've been a business owner maybe then more than I actually have, if I were to create in them that perception, and then let's say they were to outrightly later ask me or find out somehow that really it was my first year being a business owner, that would put me in a pretty bad situation with that customer. However, if they were to ask me about my experience, and instead of, you know, talking or inflating my capabilities as a business owner, I were to talk about my experience with specifically painting, I would be, in a sense, I think I'd be implicitly bluffing about my experience as a business owner, while enlarging my experience with the actual activity of the business itself. And I think in later, so let's suppose, you know, they ask me this question, like, what's your experience like with business? And I start talking about my experience with painting. It'll become clear to them, like, oh shit, she has a lot of experience. Like, I start rambling on about different kinds of paints, about different kinds of prep, all of this stuff. I'd create in them this perception that I'm a competent business person who knows what they're talking about, right? But then later, when they ask me, like, how many years have you been running the business specifically, when I then say 1 year, well, they could have the impression that I was bluffing a little bit about my experience with business specifically, but I've just given them this whole, you know, body of knowledge about all of my knowledge. Really, I've transferred my body of knowledge about the specifics of the, like, actual activity of the business to them, so that even though in that instance they'll realize that I don't have the long-term experience of a business owner, I do have the long-term experience of the activity itself, and therefore I'm not deemed any less competent, I wouldn't think, in that situation, because it's already been revealed the knowledge I have, without overdoing the knowledge, or, you know, creating the perception of them that I have more experience in business itself. So, right, so in this way, we can definitely see, I believe, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we can definitely see how the bluff is, in some capacity, a more advanced strategy than outrightly lying, because in a sense this is like a mixed optimal strategy, right? Because it will yield a better result for all of the players in the game, rather than, you know, outrightly lying, which would disadvantage the person who lies, have them branded as a liar, and then, you know, the other person doesn't trust them. Whereas, for example, in the case that I've just given about myself in business, if I create in them the impression that I'm competent, and sort of, you know, manipulate the question a bit, or, you know, manipulate, in a small sense, my answer to their question, that creates, it's a bit of a bluff in the sense that it creates the illusion temporarily that I have more experience in one area through my talking about the actual depth of experience I have in another area. It, you know, in turn leads over time to, when they actually ask me about whether I have, or how many years of experience in business I have, it leads to the better result, in the sense that they have a perception already of my competence despite my lack of years as a business owner itself. Okay, so an interesting thing about this, so like I said earlier, I believe I went digging for more research on this, on bluffing, you know, because I wasn't satisfied with what was in the book, and I really didn't want to, like, all of the information I found basically was about poker, and I'm like, for the love of God, like, something else is what I want. So what I did find, I'm gonna have to read the Kelly Clarkson, what is it called, the credentials. Okay, so I found a study. Let's go with this. I found a study by Megana A. Batt, last name Bhatt, at the Baylon College of Medicine in the Department of Neuroscience, who did a study that was posted in the Proceedings of the National Academy of the Sciences. And basically, she did a study with 76 participants, and which she separated the 76 into two groups, a group of, to play a game, a group of buyers and sellers, and hooked them up to the thing, I can't remember what it's called, the contraption that monitors your neural activity while you make decisions, so, you know, they can track the pathways of how people make decisions. And so some criticisms, there were the criticisms of the study, and they said that it contributed nothing valuable, but, you know, I think we're gonna see that it does. So basically, of the buyers and the sellers, they are, the buyer is trying to buy something from the seller, and the experimenters have told the buyers what the actual worth of the thing is, and the seller has an idea of what the actual value of the thing is. And so from the two perspectives of the buyer and the seller, the typical situation is that although the buyer knows what the thing is actually worth, their objective is to try and, you know, get that lessened somehow. So they want to probably try and bargain or lowball with that seller. And in turn, the seller knows that the buyer will likely try to negotiate and try to, you know, have the cost lessened. So from their two perspectives, they both are aware of the ways in which the other will try to manipulate them into a certain decision. And so it requires a really interesting kind of thought process, or a really interesting kind of cognitive ability to try and determine what bets to make, what offers to make, when to, you know, fold and when to give in. It requires you to put yourself in the position of that other person, and from that other person's perspective, see yourself and sort of maneuver the situation that way, right? So So, in a sense, both players need to make decisions based on their best guess of the other person's assumptions about them. And really, the only thing that was revealed that was interesting about, like, that was revealed through the study was that, essentially, they're of the buyers who made the offers to the seller, the people who were just honest, who didn't try to lowball the seller at all and just said, I want the market value price for this thing, compared to those who tried to bargain or tried to, you know, manipulate a bit. The people who tried to manipulate a bit, their neural activity making that speech act and brain act of manipulation, their neural activity was significantly different, operating different pathways than the people who were just outrightly honest. And I mean, however we want to try and draw, I don't know how we want to try and draw conclusions about that, but I just thought that in and of itself was interesting. And another interesting dimension of this too, like related to that it's abstract, I'm not sure how we're going to connect it all just yet anyway, is that in terms of game theory, in its models is mathematical, right? So what Merrill points out about this, about the bluff and about game theory and about mathematical models, is that the bluff is non-rational in the sense that you can't model it in a mathematical model. It's something that arises out of human intuition for how to manipulate strategic situations, right? So it's something that is it must be evolutionary in some sense, because we also see this kind of behavior in other animals. So, for example, in earlier chapters, he gave an example of a creature called a stickleback or a sickleback, and basically, I don't know what it is. I tried to search for it. He seemed to imply it was a fish in one instance, and then when I searched it on Google, it was a bird, so I don't know what the hell this thing actually is. I'm gonna have to do some more digging. But whatever this, hypothetical or, like, actual, this sickleback creature is, it often engages in, it doesn't have the means to really battle with another creature. However, what it'll do is engage in a sort of, with others and with others of its same species, it will engage in a sort of posing with it. So to create the illusion, literally a bluff, it'll sort of, try to puff itself out and try to make it seem like threatening, and it'll pose like that to try and get the other to back down, which is interesting. So my point about this is that it's sort of like an intuitive dimension of species on our planet to sort of bluff in these ways, or to try and lead other creatures or other humans to a conclusion about us without us actually saying anything, but just, sort of doing something through our countenance that leads them to assume something about us that'll influence their actions towards us in some way. So it's interesting. All right, so I think that there's from everything I just said there, I think there's two kinds of bluffs, really. I think that a bluff can be non-expressive in the case of the student who, makes a vague gesture, and it can also be non-expressive verbally in the sense of the stickleback, whatever that thing is, and it's posing, it's sort of conveying meaning through its posture, but it can also be, I think I'm justified in saying that it can be expressive too, by way of its, like, for example, me in the business situation, which is to say, me giving someone the impression that I have more experience than I do through my experience with something else. I think the bluff can also be expressive, because while I'm not outrightly lying, I'm creating the perception of something that's not quite there. You know what I mean there? Sorry, the double there was a little awkward. But yeah, so I think for now, I'm gonna leave it at that. I mean, I can definitely see some other ways that we can apply this bluff in both those ways. Like, I definitely can see how you could apply it to relationships, of course, I would think of that. And also other circumstances as well. So I think that's good for now. I think that's enough to digest. So next session we're going to be getting into back more into substantive game theory. This was obviously a session that was more geared towards a dimension of strategy. But we're going to be getting into John von Neumann's game theory, which is really exciting. He was the one who discovered that you could, if you remember from session 3 of Prisoner's Dilemma and Relationship Problem, John von Neumann was the one who discovered or figured out that in two-person games, such as the Prisoner's Dilemma, how you can graph them like that. So basically for any situation, iterated or otherwise, of two-person games like that, you can table the results. So he was definitely a huge thinker in game theory, so I'm really excited to read that chapter and for us to get into it. And without doubt, we're going to be getting a lot more technical than we have been yet. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm really excited for that. And also to give you a little taste of what's to come even later. I was looking through I like how he's broken it down in the book. The table of contents has what the chapter is called, but then all the individuated topics that are contained within that chapter. And in one of the much later chapters, I think chapter 10, he gets into Schrodinger's cat and the double slit experiment. So I'm not sure how he's going to tie that to game theory, but I'm so excited to find out. Okay, so thanks for watching. I hope you found this interesting as I did. I'm definitely going to do some more chewing on it. Perhaps see what kind of manipulative bluffs I can employ in my own life, for my own betterment. Or, for the optimal mixed benefit of us all. Okay.